Good afternoon, boa tarde a todos os que estão a assistir ao quarto webinar da Academia Mais Integração. Eu vou continuar em inglês. Good afternoon to all of you who are attending the fourth webinar of the Academy Plus Integration. I strongly thank Kamil Matuszk from the University of Warsaw in Poland to give this webinar. Presenting Professor Camille is a research professor, and he has two characteristics that distinguish him. First, he always does research with the aim of improving and collaborating with public administration and also with civil society organizations to improve what is already on the ground. And secondly, when he does research, he does not only interview migrant workers. For instance, in agriculture, he was also working in agriculture with them, accompanying them, doing ethnography with them. And so Professor Camille has published several papers on migration industry, the intermediaries, and other topics. And recently, his research has been focused on the Ukrainian who were displaced by war in Poland, on the policies and their lived experience that he will bring today for us. In Portugal, we also had the experience of receiving the refugees, I mean the displaced by war from Ukraine, but the highest number was in Poland, so it will bring that experience. It also will bring some of the challenges faced by public administration, and then in the end, we may put questions. This is Academy Plus Integration. It's composed of a curricular unit, immersive training for public administration. We already had about 100 public officers doing this training and with whom we have also learned. Many of them worked with Ukrainians who came after the war. Some of them went to Poland at the time. And so, Camille, thank you so much for this webinar, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Claudia. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's really great honor for me to be here and present my different outcomes from different projects on the Ukrainians, mostly migrant workers in Poland in different aspects. So today I would like to share with you some my knowledge, some maybe good practices in some areas related to how to integrate, how to manage these aspects of Ukrainian presence in Poland. So first of all, I'm by education, I'm social and public policy researcher. So I mostly focus on different aspects on public policy. So like, for example, labor migration policy and some changes, especially recently, which I occur in Polish policy making process. But also what Claudia said, I'm also focused on participant observation and conducting research among the seasonal workers from Ukraine agriculture. So that's why I decided to focus that perspective and present some most relevant information and some data which can be useful, hopefully, for the Portuguese audience. So thank you so much for invitations, and I'm really appreciate your questions, feedbacks at the end of my presentation. So first of all, this is the general overview of my presentation today. I would like to focus mostly on the Ukrainians in Poland, and this explain mostly why Ukrainians are the most relevant group in Poland, describing also the policy context and some measures towards that foreign group in Poland, present group. But also, I divided my presentation for three main parts. So firstly, I will describe mostly general overview of the situation of migrants in Poland, focusing on the Ukrainians, then presenting the situation and the changes since February 2022, so the full scale of Russian aggression in Ukraine. And then I would like to present and focus mostly on my anthropological research from seasonal workers, migrants, and my perspective and some points related to the informality in that sector, which can be also relevant for the research in Portuguese context. So first of all, some data describing why Poland became a new immigrant destination. Because in literature, me and my colleagues, we often use the concept of new immigrant destination. So the country which are under the rapidly changing the migration status from emigrant countries to immigration countries, which are the really becoming most relevant countries for the newcomers from different countries, like for example from the Ukraine. And as you can see on the presentation, I focus on some data showing the scale of the people who have valid residence cards, some different permits. So this is not the whole population of the foreign citizens or migrants in Poland, but mostly this is, the most precise data showing the scale. So from since the end of 2009 to 1st of December 2024. As you can see, also there is some differences in terms of citizenship and some composition, but mostly Ukrainians consist the most relevant, most populated group in terms of migration population in Poland. So this is, not new phenomenon. This is really old in terms of migration policy in Poland, but I would like to describe and explain most generally. This is the map of the Poland, and this is much more historical data because from 2019, but present the island type of immigration in Poland. As you can see, the most this circular close to the capital city of Poland, Warsaw. This is, the most attracting region in terms of Ukrainian workers to Poland. Yes, as you can see, there is, close to the borders with the Ukraine. So that's why this is, really important or striking feature of the Polish migration background in terms of, different area of Poland. And the green colors, what is important, that means the people from Ukraine are employed in agriculture sector. So that's why I also decide, to focus in my later presentation research on that context and that region close to the capital city of Poland, so the Warsaw. My famous and my popular chart graphs describing the population and some changes in terms of temporary migrant population, because to be honest, in Poland we can observe mostly temporary migrants from neighboring countries, and one of the neighboring country are people from Ukraine, the migrants from Ukraine, or mobile workers, we can also use that terms. As you can see, in 2017, Poland became the leading country in terms of attracting temporary migrant workers among OECD countries. So it was surprising for different researchers worldwide why Poland became such important country. As you can see, in Poland in 2017, it was above 1 million workers temporarily employed in different sectors, mostly in seasonal job like agriculture, but also hospitality or other basic services provided by mobile temporary workers, as you can see. So that's why it was, such surprising information. But this is, the proof that Poland became new immigrant destination, especially for one group, especially the workers from Ukraine. And to be honest, I would like to focus on some different aspects related to the migration policy and politics towards Ukrainians, especially before 2022. As I said, this is, huge important turning point after that date. So I would like, to divide that perspective. As you can see, and probably some of you know that mostly the closeness of the Poland and Ukraine is such important, and that's why since 2006, we observe a lot of gradual policies improvements in terms of attracting and also supporting to some extent integration, but mostly economic integration of the Ukrainian migrant workers in Poland. First of all, in 2006, in 2006, there was in establish new such highly liberalized instruments of labor market policy. We called it like simplified procedure, which can be used by employers who would like, to attract workers from different countries, and Ukraine became the leading countries for the Polish employers. So they use that instruments because they treat Ukrainians as a good workers. So the hardworking people with good community skills, because the Polish and Ukrainian language are really similar, but also, their availability, and also, their maximization strategy in terms of labor market performance. So that's why employers in Poland, they became really open for the Ukrainian workers. Also from since 2017, but also previous that date, there was, really important flows of the Ukrainians on the visa-free regime. So that's why also it was important in terms of, opening Poland in different aspects, not only in the labor market to Ukrainians who can, travel without any restriction up to 90 days. Also, in terms of such historical or migration diaspora policy, it was important, to establish at the beginning of the century the Poles cards, so the Karta Polaka in Polish, mostly dedicated for the people who can be recognized as a uncensored from the Poland. So that's why, this is important, to include that people in Polish society, and Polish government was really open, to supporting that people who has some roots in Poland, especially from the Ukraine, but not only. We can also observe before 2022 development on infrastructure supporting different category of Ukrainians, mostly the workers. So, for example, some NGOs, but also different schools, even some trade unions dedicated for the Ukrainian workers. Polish-Ukrainian agreement on social security. This is also important, another aspect showing closeness between two countries, especially in the administrative context, and some coordination of social security aspect. It was also crucial, for the workers who can appear on the Polish labor market. What is important, and unfortunately in terms of politics, we can observe huge, right-wing especially among right-wing and populist parties, in voting some anti-Ukrainian, some coercive policies, and some discussion about, sentiments related to our common history, especially, the Wołyń massacre in 1943. So it's still, relevant for that parties, and they try to use and, to shape the agenda setting related to the Ukrainians in Poland, even after the full scale of Russian aggression since 2022. Maybe I should skip, because this is much more detailed information about the labor market policy instruments which can be used by Polish employers in Poland. We have most relevant before 2022 free regimes. Work permits, declaration of hiring of foreigner, but also seasonal work permits can be used by employers. So this is short description of that instruments. Maybe I should skip because I would like to focus on another topics. And this is especially the act of assistance to Ukraine citizens in connection with the armed conflict in the territory of that country. So we call special regulation or special law. This is, such national incorporation of the temporary EU directive on migrants, which were used by the EU Commission in March 2022. In Poland, this is the example, of extraordinary legislative procedure, especially in the times, because it was just really quickly, our government responded to the needs of potential Ukrainian citizens who fled the Ukraine since the March 2022. What is important, this is, such great and best example showing that our government, our policymakers, some stakeholders, they responded just really quickly. And, they try to extend the rights for the Ukrainians, especially under the temporary protection, and they equal Ukrainian citizens with the Polish citizens, especially in terms of schools, the access to the schools, the access to the healthcare, public healthcare, but also the housing and also social benefits. And even right now, this is the case, for example, for during the presidential election campaign, some candidates, they use, especially the right wing from right-wing parties, they try to use this, benefits for the Ukrainians as a, such critics for that, to mostly open policies. There was also another new creation of such legal basis for employing the Ukrainian citizens under temporary protection. So it was, we call this as a um, notification of the employer. So it was extremely liberal aspects of the how Ukrainians who fled the war can obtain, permits to be employed legally on the labor markets. Yes, this is the scale of the data showing the number of the peoples. Of course, the German host the most part of the population of the Ukrainians who fled the war, but Poland is the second largest country who attract the Ukrainian workers. So that's why this data show the scale from the newest data from January 2025. Just the context to switch quickly to my research from seasonal migration in agriculture. So this is the comparison of two groups of migrants. So as you know, the Ukrainians migrants before 2022 and the Ukrainian war migrants since 2022 with the Polish society. As you can see, this is really surprising data, and the scale is showing, huge important activity, employment activity of the Ukrainians, especially the Ukrainians before 2022 and other group after that date. So as you can see, this is the the Ukrainians are much more active on the labor market in terms of economic activity or employment rate, even in the case of the Polish society, of the Polish workers. So that's why it's surprising, and that's why some authors, some scholars, they describe that this special regulation, which I presented few minutes before, it can be, good example showing why that quick response and that opening for the Ukrainians war migrants was such success in terms of, their incorporation into the labor market and they integrate economic integration. So that's why, as you can see, this is, huge important aspects, mostly, to establish different liberal regulation. Right now, I would like to switch quickly to the migration policy on the ground, sorry, to describing one sector showing how these different regulations can be appear and be enforced on the local perspective. Local perspective, I mean my research in the agriculture. Just briefly overview of the Polish agriculture because I decided to focus few years ago on that sectors because mostly to the specificity or some agriculture exceptionalism, especially in Poland, which can be observed in terms of, the composition of the agriculture unit. So as you can see, still employment rate in agriculture in Poland is really high in terms of other countries within the European Union. But what is important, this is, the share of small farmlands in Poland. Yes, contrary to Germany, contrary to France or even United Kingdom, in Poland we observe really family-run small farms which really need workers, seasonal workers, yes, because due to the labor shortages, such fierce competitions between different countries and different sectors, policy, farmers, they extremely need seasonal workers. So the Ukrainian workers became the most relevant part of their economic strategy in farmland. So, during my presentation, I use photos took by myself during my research observation because I would like to present you some most relevant outcomes from my research. This is, the research, longitudinal multi-sited research ethnographic, which I decided to conduct in 2019. And I still continue my research among seasonal Ukrainian workers in agriculture in Poland. So this is, mostly part of the 5 family-run farm site observation, active observation. So decide became for 20 or 30 days per peak season, per peak harvesting season, as a seasonal workers. And together with my colleagues from Ukraine, we collectively collect or harvest, different soft fruits like strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, but also apples, cucumbers, or salad. So this is my main task. To be honest, I focus mostly on different aspects of occupational and health and safety, but also some strategies of workers, informality, intermediaries role, like for example, the bus drivers who support the Ukrainian workers, but also the Polish employers, Polish farmers. So this is, really different aspects, different issue which I covered during my research. And my fieldwork is the Grójec-Powiat. This is really close, 50 kilometers south from Warsaw, because this region can be called Europe's orchard basin. So this is the most relevant part in Poland in terms of, harvesting production, especially apples and strawberries. And I decided to focus for different aspects related to the informality. Yes, because as you can observe during my short and brief description of the policy regulation, so there is plenty of different aspects for doing work in Poland legally, formally. Yes, Ukrainians can be employed on different mobile regimes, what I said, but also they can, be treated equally with the Polish workers. But still, there's huge informality in terms of their employment in agriculture. First of all, I decided to divide my research points on different shades of illegality in agriculture and some related to the residents in Poland. So first of all, there was huge problems, and maybe I should focus on the COVID-19, some special regulation, because Polish government decided to introduce special regulation, which was withdraw in July 2023 because Polish government decided to stop that special regulation regimes, and some migrants, especially Ukrainian workers, they trapped into irregularity. So that's why, for example, right now Polish governments had huge problem, how to solve that situation. And many people, as I know, they struggle with the problems of the irregularity. So, for example, their status became, valid, and that's why this is huge problem. Yes, especially, of course, the seasonal workers from Ukraine, they still utilize the visa-free regime to circularly take employment in Poland, especially in agriculture. So a lot of people who decided, to not settle down in Poland, they circular between Poland and Ukraine, and the agriculture sector is the most evident example showing that still the circularity between Poland and Ukraine is present. In terms of shades of illegality in agriculture related to the employment contract, I omitted that perspective previously, but what is important, Polish farmers can employ illegal migrants based on special type of civil law contract. We call as a harvesting contract, but even that, still farmers decide use a lot of oral contracts. They don't register that signed contracts, for example, in time regulated by the rules, by the Polish rules. So that's why there is, different aspects showing that even that farmers decide to omit regulation and prefer still illegality in agriculture. So this is, huge problem for that seasonal migrants because, for example, in terms of their social security contribution are not paid. So that's why, for example, in some emergency cases, it's huge problems and even sometimes dramatic situation where people should pay by own money from pockets for example, visiting doctors or maybe some other treatment. So that's why it's huge problem for them when they don't sign any types of contracts. In terms of related to the labor relations, I also observe, and this is, such important topic, invisible, unfortunately, among the policymakers in Poland. I try to address that issue, that the child labor of underage workers, because in 2019 and also after the 2022 new migration patterns of Ukrainians, I observed that there was a lot of cases in farm sites that the children of the seasonal workers can be employed with their parents. So that's why it's huge problem in terms of, the different anxieties, different problems in terms of having children on the farm side. So this is, illegal practices. But for example, and what is surprising, due to the labor shortages and, such problems with finding, workers for job vacancies in farm sites and generally speaking, agriculture, employers, they prefer and they really positively assess that situation that Ukrainian children want to be employed as a seasonal workers on the farm side in Poland. So that's why it's a huge problem. This is really invisible. And hopefully, maybe new regulation, which was passed today by the Polish government, there will be some possible ways to address this issue and mitigate the possibility of why children can be employed. What is important, this child with their parents, they use the visa-free regime mobile, so that's why they can be, uh, quasi-legally employed by the pharmacies because they can be present in Poland, but there is no law that allow that children under 15, be employed legally in Poland. Some practices at the intersection of the illegal employment, work exploitation, and some non-compliance measures. So just really quickly, I think the similar issue can be found also in Portugal, in other countries like new immigrant destination. But for me, what is important, this is also, unclear dealings with intermediaries. Yes, what Claudia said, I mostly deal with the migration industry actors, and in agriculture, especially in the harvesting jobs like strawberry fields or apples, there is a dominance of the model of crossing the bus drivers who can pick workers from Ukraine and transport them to the specific farm site in Poland. This is informal activities. We call them as a middleman, as a informal brokers, because this is such informal services. Of course, either employers or workers paid for that services, but without any contracts, without any guarantee that the workers will be, treat in good way, can be employed on decent work conditions. So that's why it's huge problems. And even right now, Polish government decide, to regulate that aspects in terms of intermediaries, generally speaking, not only address the situation in agriculture, but generally Polish government try to, you know, um, stop or ban different circumventing practices of that actors, especially the employment and temporary work agencies in Poland. So that's why it's really, huge issue in Poland, a really salient issue in Poland. And the last for my presentation, I would like to describe just really briefly why still this phenomenon is present. I mean, the illegality of employing the Ukrainian workers in Poland. And I divided four perspectives. So from workers' perspective, unfortunately, migrant workers from Ukraine, they agree for that situation. So they appreciate that can be, just really quickly without any formality, without any administration burdens. For example, they can, take employment, for example, for a few days, for 2 or 3 weeks. So for them, it's extremely relevant, and this circular strategy, circular mobility strategy is still dominant and prevalent for them, unfortunately. Yes. Also, for some vulnerable groups, like for example, elderly workers, but also for the children, this illegality. So I mean, for example, working without any signed contract is, maximization's strategy, in terms of income in Poland. So that's why, for example, they decide, to take just, quick jobs. For example, they jump to the Polish labor market, especially in the agriculture. So that's why, this is, their aware strategy in terms of labor market and some, navigating on the labor market. From the employers, this is really similar. This is the case, of course, the cost minimization, or, to having the cheap labor force, which can be used especially in agriculture farm side. But there is also the problem, and this is huge barriers for employers in Poland, for example. So this is the, the slow process of the administration issue. So I mean, for example, to obtain work permits, or even to to make some formalities related to employing the workers, even from the Ukraine. And this is, time consuming, and there is a lot of administrative burdens, barriers, mostly due to the understaffed and underfunded public administration in Poland. So probably also you guys in Portugal, you can also observe the similar situation. It's element of the new immigrant destination. So the infrastructure, the general infrastructure, for absorbing or attracting workers from other countries is ineffective in that integration or inclusion of that people. In terms of state authorities, why they explain and they still, agree for that situation. So that situation, I mean, huge informality, huge illegal employment in agriculture. This is mostly with my colleagues, we called that situation as agriculture exceptionalism, and mostly the food security. This is, the most relevant ideas and some sentiments which Polish politicians, policymakers, they use. Even during the COVID, in terms of essential workers narrative, they still produce that situation that the food security is the most relevant. Even if we compare the food security in one countries like in Poland with the situation of the migrant workers, like for example Ukrainians in Poland. But what is also important in Poland, the Farmers Association, the Growers Association, this is the most powerful groups in terms of lobbying, in terms of liberal access to the labor market in Poland, especially to the agriculture and rural areas. So that's why we observe huge, vested interested of that groups can be addressed by the policymakers. And that's why, for example, this huge presence of the Ukrainians since 2006, this is, mostly the cause of the lobbying of the grower association who needed workers, cheap workers, flexible workers from neighboring countries like Ukraine. Last but not least, the non-state actors' perspective. What I said, it was perspective before 2022 in terms of trade unions and trade organization, because right now there is no any organization which can address the workers' perspective from Ukraine. So that's why this is huge challenging situation for workers. There is also the lack information about what kind of formal institutions can be, the solving actors who can support Ukrainian workers in Poland in agriculture, but also in other sectors. This is, really similar problems in terms of accessing these formal institutions. But what is also important in seasonal job, still this is the low level of media and public interest or awareness about the vulnerable situation, exploitative perspective, and this huge informality feature of employing Ukrainians in Poland. Concluding, I put three questions without any, summarizing, because I think it's extremely relevant, to focus especially the consequences and the ask myself, but also our colleagues, we ask ourselves what will be the impact of the new migration package, which even today was passed. What I said, Polish government decided, to send that regulations to Polish president to sign it. We will see what will happen. Yes, because some coercive policies aspects, some especially, regulation who try to stop circumvent of the employers or intermediaries, the regulation in terms of employment and working conditions of the Ukrainian workers in Poland, for example. Yes, there's also the concept of such, hostile environment, especially during right now presidential campaign in Poland, because in May we will vote for the Polish president. And for example, the case of Ukrainians, generally speaking, yes, they right, the social rights in Poland. This is, one of the hot salient issue used by the candidates for this presidential election. And last but not least, because I focus mostly on the Ukrainians, but to be honest, we can also observe, much more diversification of the composition of migrants in Poland. So, for example, at the same time, Ukraine still is the dominant group, but for example, some workers are recruited for Colombia, from Mexico, but mostly from Nepal, Philippines, or India. This is, the most relevant new target groups, which, for example, Polish employers and policymakers try to use as a news sources for, different sectors, especially that which face, huge labor shortages. So maybe I should stop right now. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, feedbacks, or some comments, I will be really happy to answer for them.
Thank you so much, Camille, for your presentation. And thank you all always to make the comparison between before the war and after the war. That was very meaningful. Making also the comparison with Portugal, we have now have the perspective from you, from a country that makes a border with Ukraine, Poland, and we, Portugal, are probably the farthest country from Ukraine.
Yeah.
Um, Also in Portugal, the Ukrainians were the seventh nationality in 2022. So although in Portugal there were Ukrainian migrants in a significant dimension in this century, it's compared to Poland, there were much more. But it was interesting to understand how it was the integration or trying the integration.
Mhm,
And second, in Portugal, we also have the question of the seasonal work and the irregularity of workers.
mhm,
And this happens in Portugal, in Poland, but also with the red berry fruits in Sweden, or with tomato industry in Spain, or in Italy. And until now, it seems that no government or municipalities or public administration could still have a strategy to prevent and stop the intermediaries
mhm,
who profit from the seasonal workers who are in working in one company, and then when the red berries stop or other fruits, they go to another, and that's the cycle when they turn in illegal status. This is, and you have worked on this with the intermediaries who profit from this, and of course they don't want the government or public administration to interfere. But I was wondering if you have any suggestion, whether for government or public administration, to prevent this or to stop this. Because some of the people, public officers, students who are attending today the conference, they also work in this area or they are trying to do their best to stop this. But we know it's very challenging, and
mhm.
it seems to us that no country still could fight this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Claudia, for that comments and the questions. To be honest, as I know, there is no one possible, instruments or solutions for that practices. Yes, because to be honest, and even I can argue that the intermediaries, generally speaking, private labor market intermediaries, are the most powerful actors right now on the global labor markets when we called and we look at that situation. So for example, in Polish case, our government decide to during the first draft of the regulation, they put a lot of practices which can be the aim of that regulations should be to ban the abusive intermediaries, to stop their making lucrative business on unaware migrant workers that would be workers, for example. But to be honest, right now today, unfortunately, due to the strong lobbying of that organization, not only employers, but for example, the intermediaries organization in Poland, association of that organization, they won. And for example, some coercive towards intermediaries, informal intermediaries practices were rejected by the Polish government. So unfortunately, I don't know what can be done in terms of improving the situation in terms of the global labor market and this perspective of how to stop, how to mitigate the perspective of the abusive intermediaries. I don't know. But for example, sometimes I heard a lot of about, to establishing some list of good or honest intermediaries, like really similar like with employers. So some argue and use different perspectives describing, but for example, establishing the formal central administration led base with different organization based on, for example, different criteria which should be met by different intermediaries registered in given countries. In Poland, still there is no such register for that employment for the honest employers or employment agencies, or in general speaking intermediaries. So to be honest, I don't know what is the solution. Yes, because I would like to manage this perspective in terms of intermediaries, but today case of the Polish legislation show me that these actors had such capacity and the power to stop or ban the proposals which should stop their activities on the labor market, global labor market. So
It's very
maybe the European Union
challenging.
should address this issue. But to be honest, this is, the still, invisible issue. The European Commission, for example, and other EU bodies, they mostly pay attention to the human trafficking. Yes, especially during the refugee crisis. And of course, they address a lot of issues describing these illegal practices of someone who, illegal brokers. But mostly I focus on the labor market intermediaries. And that issue, according my best knowledge, there is, still, really invisible and forgotten issue by the EU policymakers, unfortunately.
Yes, because it's also not mentioned in the new pact on migration and asylum. Only the talents, this is skilled
Yeah.
jobs, are mentioned. And so it's really challenging. There are some good practices, but not
Yeah.
in a predominant way. And regarding the civil society, is there any good practice that you would like to highlight from what you know in Poland, or from other good practice from the public administration that in Portugal we could be inspired if we are not doing it,
Mhm.
that you remember on this topic or regarding the migrants?
Could you repeat, Claudia? Sorry, because I
Yes.
was.
Do you want to, is there any on your work with municipalities,
Mhm.
with the central public administration, um, with the civil society, is
Mhm.
there any good practice that you would like to share? For instance, you mentioned the education that we
Yeah.
also have in Portugal,
Yeah.
or
To be honest,
any other good practice? Yes.
Yeah, to be honest, the Polish municipalities, especially since 2022, became the forefront of the leader, the active players in terms of integration of the migrant workers.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
in Poland, on the Polish, the national scale, there was a lot of, changes in legislation, towards to accessing workers from different countries to the labor market, and that's all, without any integration measures, without any good practices. And to be honest, for example, the Warsaw municipality, as a capital city of Poland, they establish different strategies towards, the integration, not only in economic integration, because this lens is dominated by the policymakers in Poland, looking at the migrants in Poland as a migrant worker. So that's why I decide to choose on that perspective in my presentation. But to be honest, this is still, the people who can be, which needs should be addressed by different actors in Poland, even by the municipality. And fortunately, Polish municipalities, but mostly, higher cities, the bigger cities, like, for example, Warsaw, Kraków, Gdańsk, Poznań, Lublin, close to the Ukrainian borders, they became really actively engaged in, migrant communities, and they try to, respond for their needs, for their problems. So, for example, as I know, in terms of housing policies, for example, is because this is important for the migrants who decide to settle down in Poland, to support them. So some municipalities, provide some own flats for the migrants temporarily, but still, this is, such great support for migrants from Ukraine mostly, yes, because that category is, prioritized by different municipalities. Not only, but Ukrainians can be, treated the best, according to me and my knowledge. In terms of schools, for example, there was, such supporting teacher who from Ukraine who can be employed by the schools, for example, and who can teach, pupils using the Ukrainian language. For example, yes, it was really popular, especially since March 2022. What else? To be
Yes, but
honest,
both two good practices are also very inspiring. Yes,
yeah. The supporting teacher is extremely relevant, but also for me, the lax and maybe the bad practices is, that the municipalities they don't address the issue of the seasonal workers and some irregular migrants or informal employment provided by the migrants. So that's why this is, still the invisible issue for the governments, for the municipalities on the local level. And especially there is huge lack of the any trade unions or labor organizations supporting and advocating for the labor rights in terms of
yes,
migrant
that is
workers.
also
Yes.
very similar in
Yeah,
Portugal.
yeah. So I think there should be much more addressed that issue, and especially in terms of when we discuss about the municipality or local level, there is a lot of lax, and it's horrible situation in terms of rural areas because
Yes,
huge part of the Ukrainians, especially since 2022, they decided to settle down in the rural areas, and that aspect it's not addressed. Not addressed. I mean, they
it's
needs, they
invisible.
problems, they issue, which
Yeah,
came,
yeah,
with that new situation for them, but also for the hosting population or citizens.
okay.
So that's
Yeah,
why there is a lot of problems, some tensions between people, yes, in terms of access to the healthcare system. And unfortunately, the small provinces, small municipalities, especially rural areas, they don't address properly that issue. And this is,
that issue.
huge challenge for the Polish
Yeah.
municipalities.
Thank you so much. We reached our time. Thank you so much for bringing the policies and lived experience of Ukrainians in Poland, whether the perspective of the migrant, in this case, workers, of the municipalities, of the government, also for the good practices. It was really very insightful for us. And so thank you very much, and I hope we can meet again in the Academy Plus integration
Thank you so much. If anyone has more questions, I will be happy to
to
answer via
answer
my
by
email or
email.
contact by the Center of Migration Research at the University of Warsaw. So welcome and thank you so much.
Thank you. And so I also thank everyone who is attending. Our next webinar will be in April with the Vice President of a municipality who works, who has a very solid worker with migrant workers in agriculture from Torres Vedras and Umbelino, and we'll meet all there. Thank you and all the best.
The recording is stop or